Welcome to the first WCAT Beach Reads Book Talks. This is actually our 6th annual book talk for the Lucius Beebe Memorial Library, which we've entitled Beach Reads for the last 6 years, if I've mentioned. And my name is Leanne Ellis. I'm a Reader's Advisory and Reference Librarian at the Lucius Beebe Memorial Library in Wakefield. And one of the things we love to do more than anything is talk about books. So with me today is actually the entire reference department. This is Karen Stern. She's also in charge of our programming. Jeff Clapes, head of Reader Services and our boss. This is Beth Radcliffe, who also is in charge of home delivery, and that's Jackie Powers, who's in charge of our PR. So we're all happy to be here today to talk to you about some books for the summer reads. The lists that we're going to talk about are online at wakefieldlibrary.org. You can find them under BookBuzz Book Lists, and we will also have them out for the entire summer, and the display of a variety of the books that we're talking about will be rotating through that display the entire summer. So please come on in and help yourself. I'm going to begin by turning it over to Karen Stern, who will talk a little bit first about her list this summer.
So my list there's been so much talk this year and the past few years about immigration in the news. And I get a little frustrated because there's a lot of talk about groups of people and numbers and policies, but there are not a lot of stories about the individuals involved. And so as a librarian, because stories are important to me, I decided to go looking for books to tell the stories behind the numbers and the policies. So my list is a list of fiction and nonfiction, and it's mostly told by people who come from the immigrant populations that they're writing about. And if they're not that, then they have certainly done a lot of research and have a lot of real life accounts to draw on.
So what's the first book you're going to talk about?
The first book I'm going to talk about is When the Moon is Low by Nadia Hashimi. And this book is fiction, but I would almost say it reads like nonfiction because it's such a timely topic. It's essentially a tale of that horrific journey that so many people are making from Central Asia, places like Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq, through Turkey and Greece, and all the way and up into Europe. So it's very much something that's in the news and happening today. The story is of a young mother. Her name is Fareba, and her family's flight out of Afghanistan. So they're trying to get to England, where they think they have some family. And it's certainly, a journey that takes place in the direst of circumstances. Now, this author she's not a first-generation immigrant herself. She's an Afghan American. She lives in Washington, D.C., but she has cousins and uncles who have made this journey very recently, and so she's drawing on their stories.
So what in particular drove you to read When the Moon is Low?
Well, there were two things about this book. One, I've always been intrigued by Afghanistan. I really wanted to know more about Afghanistan and what it was like in the past and why people now are so kind of driven to get out. I also wanted to know more about that journey, about that really dangerous route that everyone is taking these days, and that has become so kind of terribly familiar to people. So I was rewarded on both fronts. The first part of the book is really a lovely kind of simple, like almost folk-like tale of Fareba's early life in Afghanistan. And while she might not have thought she had such a great life, she has kind of an evil stepmother, and she's kind of, who doesn't let her go to school while her other sisters do. And she has some problems in her love life, as many teens do. It gives you this really different picture than you hear about so often these days of Afghanistan. And she lives in a lovely house with orchards and talks about going to the markets, and it's just much more a picture of ordinary life. So I really appreciated having that, which is then set against the rest of it, which is the second part of the book, and a bit longer part of the book, which is this kind of harrowing tale of Fareba, who is now grown, and her children having to get out of Afghanistan. They are forced by a tragedy to flee and then attempt this trip to England. And the second part of the story is mostly told by Salim, her 14-year-old son. and it's witnessed through his eyes, and so it's particularly upsetting in some ways, especially for me, because I'm the mother of teens. I'm a mother of teenage boys. And what happens is Salim gets separated from his family. So it's this, they don't know what's happened to him, and he has to go in search of them and try to find them again, all the way up through Europe by himself. He meets a lot of unsavory characters. He has to go through the border crossings and the assaults, and all of this, you're rooting for him to get there. So,
It reminds me of the book by Ariel Sabra, My Father's Paradise, because
Right.
he leaves northern Iraq, but he describes life there first, and then he has to describe the journey of leaving
Right.
Iraq. He goes first to Israel, and then he comes to the States, so there's a lot of
and
parallels
is that
there.
fiction or nonfiction?
Nonfiction.
That's nonfiction.
Yeah.
Okay.
Who would you recommend this to?
This is a great book for people who like plot. Obviously, it's kind of almost, it reads like an adventure story. Here's this family and then this child, or this 14-year-old, moving along this path and just trying to get to find each other again. So that and the characters are very compelling. And I would also say that there's a strong sense of place. So as I mentioned at the beginning, as I was talking about the early scenes in Afghanistan, they very much stuck with me. They're very, simple in lots of ways and beautiful. And then by contrast, you get a real sense of the camps that Salim is stuck in when he goes through Greece and Rome and Calais, and this sort of the squalor and the desperation and the isolation and the loneliness. It's those really stuck with me as well.
Do you think people who like The Kite Runner, which I know takes place mostly in Afghanistan, but do you think that
Yeah,
would
I
appeal
think
to
I
people
absolutely
too?
think there's some parallels there, especially because of the young boys, the
Yeah.
sort of
the daily life kind
yeah,
of thing.
and then the daily life kind of thing. Absolutely, yeah.
This is such a tough subject. Is there anything you'd like to say to to readers who are interested in this that you think you might want to sort of give them a heads up about?
There are some flaws in the book. They're not fatal flaws, though. It's not what I would call a masterfully written book. It's not a work of literature, but it has a kind of charming, simple flow, the language. So I didn't mind that it wasn't always maybe the best written book I'd read, and there might be a few holes in the plot. But again, it's so fast paced, and you're rooting for him to find them, and so that's the kind of the driving factor. And I think above all, Hashimi has this ability to make us feel her character's humanity. That's what connects you to the book, and that's what I loved about it. And I think in the end, the power of good fiction is in the ability of the author to communicate with our imaginations and to take us inside situations that we wouldn't otherwise be able to get into, to connect with. And so that's why I would recommend the book. It lets you make that imaginative leap and to connect with millions of real people who are feeling compelled to leave their homes every year, and each one having a story kind of as unique as yours and mine. So that's Nadia Hashimi's When the Moon is Low. And now we're going to move on to Jeff, I think.
Yes, so for my theme this year, I thought that since summer is a time when people tend to like to tackle classics or more heavy-duty fiction because they feel they should during the summer, I thought I would talk about the Booker Prize, which is something that not everybody is familiar with. It's a British prize. It started, it's for fiction. It was started in 1968, I believe, in the United Kingdom. It's named for there was a wholesale food company that started it originally as the sponsor, and it's gone on since then. It changed in, I want to say, 2002 to the Man Booker Prize because of the name of the company that took over the sponsorship at that time, but everybody kind of knows it as the Booker, and it's well known in that regard. It's often compared to the Pulitzer Prize here in the United States, although I think it has the quality of the literature is slightly different. It's given every fall to the work published in English. The criteria is that it has to be published in English, written in English, and it can be by anybody who is a member of the UK, or the British Commonwealth, rather. So that includes a wide variety of countries, from everything from England and Ireland and Wales and so forth, but also South Africa, Australia, India. You get a real interesting international complexion to the winners. The winners are chosen from, they're nominated about 10 or 12, no more than that, sometimes like up to 10 or 20 nominations at the beginning with what is called the long list. And then that's winnowed down by the advisory committee to what they call a short list of maybe 5 or 6, and then they announce the final winner in October every year. Even being nominated for the prize, either the short or the long list, is a huge honor for a writer and can often make or break their careers, not to mention winning the prize completely. You've probably actually heard of a lot of the winners without actually realizing it. People like Margaret Atwood, Hilary Mantel is a big author recently, Jan Martel for Life of Pi, Ian McEwan, people like that. So there are definitely a lot of names that you might have heard of, but the ones that I've chosen to focus on this time around are some that might have flown a little bit under the radar and are some of my personal favorites that not everybody might be as familiar with.
So which book did you choose?
So my first one is by John Banville. It's called The Sea, and it won the prize in 2005. John Banville is an Irish novelist, and he has a really lush and very creative prose style that has been likened over the years to people like Marcel Proust or Vladimir Nabokov, both of whom I like very much, so I enjoyed this in particular. This is a very short novel by him. He's won a number of other prizes in addition to the Booker, and he's kind of been rumored over the years to be in the running for an eventual Nobel Prize in Literature, which is given to people who are still alive, so it'll be interesting to see whether that happens at some point in the next maybe decade or so. He also, for those people who are interested in this kind of writing as well, he writes under the pseudonym of Benjamin Black. Under that name he writes, it's a series of crime novels that all take place in Dublin in the 1950s, so they have a very strong sense of time and place, but they're very literary because of the quality of his writing. It's different from the book I'm talking about this morning, but I would highly recommend people who are interested in that to check into those books as well, because they're really well done.
Aside from the qualities you've already discussed, why do you think it won this particular one?
I would say if you had to pick one criteria, it's the language. I actually have written some of these down. Here are some of the adjectives that different reviewers have used to describe his writing: lyrical, luminous, wintry, I love that word, incandescent, dazzling, perfectly crafted. And I would agree with all of those. I'd also add the word spare. This is a short novel. He doesn't, there's no extraneous language here that isn't necessary to get across what he's trying to say. What's interesting is he actually makes a point of publicly saying how much he hates his own writing, and he's extremely critical of his own work, which is kind of silly because everyone else, given all the awards he's won, clearly he's wrong. Everybody really likes his work, but it's been kind of a thing for him to be very critical of his own work. I would recommend, if you do have any interest in trying this out, it's worth almost reading a few passages aloud to yourself, just because it's such chewy prose. Or even better yet, if you have an opportunity to listen to the audiobook and have someone read it in that way, that's a great way to listen to him.
Bookers are, I think, well known for the fact that they have a variety of literary styles that win. You never know what's going to come up the pike. What would you say The Sea is about?
It's interesting because The Sea is, it's more of a set piece. It doesn't have a lot of plot. What it's about essentially is a middle-aged, getting older man, Irish man named Max, and he has recently lost to a sort of lengthy, debilitating illness, lost his wife. So he's going through the grief process. And in order to deal with that, although I'm not sure, in the book it's not even clear that he understands why he's doing this,